The rain did not fall gently over Blackwood Pier. It hammered against the corrugated iron roofs like thousands of angry fists. It was 2 in the morning. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusted metal containers and towering cranes that looked like skeletal giants in the flashing lightning. Arthur, a 60-year-old night watchman with a bad hip and a weary soul, sat in the small, drafty security booth. He wrapped his cold hands around a mug of stale coffee, staring out into the deluge. But he was not alone. Curled up on the cracked linoleum floor beside his boots was Titan. Titan was a massive Rottweiler mix, with a chest like a barrel and a scar running from his left ear down to his snout. To the outside world, Titan was a monster. People crossed the street when they saw him. The shipyard supervisor, a man named Henderson, had tried to have the dog removed 3 times, calling him a liability and a ticking time bomb. But Arthur knew better. He reached down, his calloused hand resting on the dog's broad black head. "Rough night, old boy," Arthur whispered. Titan didn't open his eyes, but his stub of a tail gave a single rhythmic thump against the floor. He wasn't sleeping. Titan was never truly sleeping. His ears, though relaxed, were rotating like radar dishes, filtering the sounds of the storm. He heard the screech of metal grinding on metal. He heard the distant wail of a foghorn. He heard the erratic heartbeat of the old man beside him. Suddenly, Titan's head snapped up. His amber eyes, usually soft when looking at Arthur, narrowed into slits of intense focus. A low, guttural rumble started deep in his chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It was a vibration of warning. Arthur froze. What is it? Is it Henderson coming for a surprise inspection? Titan stood up. His muscles coiled tight beneath his short, dark fur. He moved to the door of the booth and pressed his nose against the cold glass, whining softly, a sound that seemed too high-pitched for such a beast. Arthur grabbed his flashlight and his heavy raincoat. "Show me," he said. He opened the door, and the storm swallowed them instantly. The wind was howling so loud, it drowned out thought. But Titan didn't hesitate. He didn't run. He stalked. He moved with a predatory grace toward the labyrinth of shipping containers stacked near the edge of the dark, churning water. Arthur limped behind him, struggling to keep the beam of his flashlight steady. "Titan, wait up!" Arthur yelled over the wind, but the dog ignored him. Titan had caught a scent. It was faint, barely a thread woven into the overwhelming smell of salt, rust, and ozone. It was the scent of fear. And it was coming from Sector 4, the restricted zone where the old drainage pipes emptied into the sea. As they rounded the corner of a red container, Titan stopped dead. He barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the thunder. Arthur caught up, breathless, wiping rain from his eyes. "What? What is down there?" Arthur shined his light where the dog was pointing. At first, he saw nothing but slick concrete and the black ocean water rising dangerously high with the tide. Then, he saw it. A small, yellow rain boot floating in a puddle. And 10 feet away, trapped between 2 shifted steel pipes, was a gap barely big enough for a human to squeeze through. But from that darkness, a small, terrified voice cried out. "Mommy?" Arthur's heart stopped. A child, trapped in the industrial zone during a Category 1 storm. Arthur rushed to the gap, dropping to his knees. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm coming!" He tried to squeeze between the pipes, but the gap was too narrow for his broad shoulders. Panic clawed at his throat. The water was rising fast. In 20 minutes, This entire section would be submerged. He grabbed his radio, his fingers trembling. "Control! This is Arthur. I have a code red in Sector 4. A child is trapped. I repeat, a child is trapped." Static hissed back. "Arthur, stop drinking on the job." Henderson's voice crackled, dripping with annoyance. "There are no kids on the pier. Go back to the booth." "I am not drunk," Arthur screamed, his voice cracking. "Send the fire department, now!" "Log off, Arthur. We'll talk about your employment in the morning." The radio clicked dead. Arthur stared at the device in horror. No one was coming. He looked at the rising water, then at the narrow gap. He looked at Titan. The dog was looking back at him, shaking from the cold, but his eyes were burning with an intelligence that went beyond training. Titan stepped forward and nudged Arthur's hand with his wet nose. He looked at the gap, then back at Arthur. He was asking for permission. Arthur realized what the dog intended to do. It was suicide. The pipes were unstable, slippery, and dark. If Titan got stuck, he would drown with the child. "Titan," Arthur choked out. The dog let out a sharp bark, impatient. "Trust me." Arthur swallowed his fear. He knelt down and unbuckled Titan's heavy leather collar so it wouldn't get snagged. "Go," Arthur whispered, his voice breaking. "Bring them home." Titan lowered his body, flattening himself against the wet concrete, and crawled into the darkness where no man could go. Arthur watched the black tail disappear into the shadows, and for the first time in 40 years, he began to pray. Part 2. The world inside the pipe was a suffocating tunnel of concrete and slime. Titan had to crawl on his belly. The rough cement scraped against his underbelly, and the smell of mold and stagnant seawater was overwhelming, burning his sensitive nose. But beneath the stench of the storm, the scent of the child was strong, sweet, sharp, frantic. Titan pushed forward, his claws scrabbling for grip on the slick surface. 5 meters in, 10 meters. The pipe narrowed. Most dogs would have panicked. Most dogs would have backed out as the water began to lap at their paws, cold and rising fast. Titan did not panic. He had been found in a dumpster as a puppy, half-starved. He knew what it meant to be trapped in the dark. Ahead, a small sob echoed off the walls. Titan let out a soft chuff of air, a friendly greeting. He rounded a slight bend and saw him. A boy, no older than 7, huddled against a blockage of debris. The water was already at the boy's waist. He was shaking so violently that his teeth chattered like castanets. When the boy saw Titan's massive silhouette in the dim light filtering from cracks above, he didn't feel relief. He screamed, "No! Go away! Monster!" The boy kicked out, his small boot striking Titan's snout. Titan flinched, blinking his amber eyes. But he didn't growl. He didn't retreat. He understood. He was used to being the monster in everyone's story. Instead of barking, Titan lowered his heavy head into the water, making himself look smaller. He crept forward, inch by agonizing inch, until his nose touched the boy's freezing hand. He licked the boy's fingers once. Warm, rough, gentle. The boy froze. Titan whined, a high, desperate sound that said, "We have to go now." Outside on the pier, the situation was deteriorating. Arthur was screaming into the darkness of the pipe, his voice raw. "Titan, do you have him?" Behind him, tires screeched on the wet asphalt. A patrol vehicle slammed to a halt, blinding Arthur with its high beams. Henderson, the shipyard supervisor, stormed out. He was a thick-set man in a dry raincoat, his face red with annoyance. "Arthur, I warned you!" Henderson shouted over the wind. "Making false distress calls? Creating a scene? You're done. Hand over your badge." "Shut up!" Arthur roared, turning on his boss with a ferocity that made Henderson step back. "There is a child in the outflow pipe," Henderson scoffed, looking at the narrow, dark hole. "Don't be stupid. That pipe has been grated off for years. Nothing is in there but rats and your aggressive mutt." "Titan went in," Arthur pleaded, grabbing Henderson's arm. "The water is rising. If we don't get them out—" "Get your hands off me!" Henderson shoved Arthur back. "I'm calling animal control. That dog is dangerous and you are delirious." Crack! A sickening sound came from the pier's foundation. The storm surge was shifting the old concrete slabs. The pipe groaned. Inside, the water surged. It hit Titan's chest. There was no time for gentle persuasion anymore. The boy was too frozen with fear to move. Titan made a choice. He lunged forward, opening his massive jaws. The boy screamed again, thinking he was being bitten. But Titan didn't bite skin. He clamped his teeth firmly onto the thick collar of the boy's winter jacket. With a powerful jerk of his neck, Titan pulled the boy off the debris and into the water. The boy thrashed, flailing, swallowing water. Titan clamped down harder, his jaw muscles locking like steel. He began to backpedal. It was a nightmare of physics. Titan had to drag 50 pounds of dead weight against the current, while moving backward in a tunnel that barely fit his own body. His claws tore at the concrete, ripping until they bled. His hind legs slipped, scrambled, and found purchase again. Heave, drag, breathe. Heave, drag, breathe. The water was touching the roof of the pipe now. Titan had to tilt his nose up just to keep air in his lungs. The boy was submerged, his head bobbing up only when Titan yanked him upward. Outside, Henderson was on his phone, dialing the police to report a crazy employee. "Yes, he's violent. He set his dog loose at the—" Arthur gasped. "Titan!" From the black mouth of the pipe, 2 glowing amber eyes appeared. Then, a black snout, gasping for air. Titan burst from the hole, half drowning, dragging a bundle of blue nylon behind him. He collapsed on the wet concrete, heaving, releasing his grip on the jacket. The bundle coughed. Then it cried. Henderson dropped his phone. It shattered on the ground. Arthur fell to his knees, not caring about his bad hip, and pulled the boy into his arms. The child was blue-lipped, covered in sludge, but alive. "Oh, God," Henderson whispered, his face draining of color. Is that the mayor's son?" The boy had been missing for 6 hours. Every news station in the city was running his photo. Arthur didn't answer. He was busy wrapping his own coat around the shivering child. But Titan didn't rest. The dog stood up on trembling legs. He shook the water from his coat, sending a spray of mud over Henderson's expensive shoes. He walked over to the boy, sniffed his face to check his breathing, and then sat down between Arthur and Henderson. He looked at the supervisor. Titan didn't growl. He just stared. His gaze was heavy, judging, and absolutely terrifying. For the first time in his life, Henderson felt small. But as the distant sirens finally wailed closer, signaling the arrival of the police and ambulances, Arthur noticed something. Titan was limping, and there was a dark, steady stream of blood mixing with the rainwater pooling under the dog's stomach. The sharp metal debris inside the pipe hadn't just cut the boy's jacket. It had sliced Titan deep. Arthur reached out, his hand shaking. Buddy? Titan looked at Arthur, gave one slow wag of his tail, and then his heavy eyes rolled back. The great black dog crumpled silently to the wet ground. The flashing blue and red lights of the ambulance painted the wet concrete in dizzying strokes of color. Paramedics swarmed the scene. They lifted the mayor's son onto a stretcher, wrapping him in thermal blankets, checking his vitals, shouting medical codes over the roar of the wind. But Arthur wasn't looking at them. He was on the ground, his knees soaking in a mixture of rain and dark blood. "Help him!" Arthur screamed, pressing his hands against the deep gash on Titan's stomach. "Somebody help him!" A young paramedic glanced over, pausing for a split second. "Sir, we need to transport the child. We aren't equipped for animals." "He saved the boy!" Arthur's voice cracked, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "He's dying." The paramedic looked sympathetic, but shook his head and jumped into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. The siren wailed, fading into the distance. Arthur was left alone in the storm with a dying dog. Henderson stood nearby, looking pale and useless, holding his umbrella. "Arthur?" Henderson stammered, his voice losing its usual arrogance. I didn't know." "Get your truck," Arthur growled, not looking up. "What?" "Get your truck!" Arthur roared, his eyes wild. "Or I swear to God, Henderson, I will break every bone in your body." Henderson scrambled. He ran to his company SUV, throwing the back door open. Arthur scooped Titan up. The dog was heavy, nearly 100 pounds of dead weight, and Arthur's bad hip screamed in agony. But adrenaline is a powerful drug. He heaved Titan into the back seat of the pristine leather interior, not caring about the mud or the blood. "Drive!" Arthur yelled as he climbed in, cradling Titan's head in his lap. "The emergency vet on 4th Street. Go!" The ride was a blur of motion and terror. Arthur kept one hand on Titan's chest, feeling for the heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It was getting slower, fainter. "Stay with me, buddy," Arthur whispered, pressing his forehead against the dog's wet fur. "You don't get to leave me. Not like this. You're a good boy. The best boy." Titan's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and ragged. The loss of blood was catastrophic. When they screeched to a halt in front of the 24-hour veterinary clinic, Arthur didn't wait for the car to stop completely. He kicked the door open and carried Titan inside, shouting for help. The lobby was empty and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm outside. A vet tech looked up from the desk, saw the blood, saw the size of the dog, and hit a red button on the wall. "Gurney, stat!" A team of 3 vets in blue scrubs rushed out. They didn't ask questions. They saw the emergency. They lifted Titan onto the rolling table. "Pulse is weak," one vet shouted. "Gums are pale. He's in shock. Get an IV line. Prep the OR." As they wheeled Titan through the double swing doors, Arthur tried to follow, but a nurse gently held him back. "Sir, you can't go in there. We have to operate." "He's all I have," Arthur whispered, his hands trembling, covered in his best friend's blood. "We will do everything we can," she promised. The doors swung shut. Arthur collapsed into a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. The silence that followed was suffocating. 1 hour passed, then 2. Arthur stared at the clock on the wall. Every tick felt like a hammer to his chest. Henderson hadn't left. The supervisor sat in the corner, staring at his hands, stripped of his authority, just a man witnessing the cost of his own prejudice. At 4:30 a.m., the clinic door opened, but it wasn't the vet. It was a man in a wet trench coat, flanked by 2 police officers. It was Mayor Sterling. The mayor looked exhausted, his eyes red from crying, but he scanned the room with intensity. He spotted Arthur, the old man in the dirty, blood-stained security uniform. The mayor walked straight to him. Arthur stood up slowly, bracing himself. He expected to be fired. He expected to be arrested for the scene at the pier. Mayor Sterling stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Arthur's bloody hands. "My son told me," the mayor said, his voice thick with emotion. "He told me about the monster in the pipe." Arthur looked down. "Sir, He said the monster pulled him out," the mayor continued. "He said the monster wouldn't let him drown." The mayor took a step closer and grabbed Arthur's hand, shaking it firmly. "Where is he?" Arthur pointed to the closed double doors of the operating room. "He's fighting," Arthur said softly. Just then, the double doors opened. The lead veterinarian stepped out. She pulled down her surgical mask. Her face was tired, and her expression was unreadable. Arthur stopped breathing. "Well?" Arthur choked out. The vet looked at Arthur, then at the mayor, and finally took a deep breath. "He lost a lot of blood," she said. "The laceration missed his femoral artery by 2 millimeters. If you had arrived 5 minutes later, he would be dead." She paused. "But he's a fighter. He's stable. He's going to make it." Arthur let out a sob that sounded like a laugh, covering his face with his hands as his legs finally gave out. The storm had long since passed, replaced by the pale, crisp light of early morning 2 weeks later. The Blackwood Veterinary Clinic was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. In Recovery Room B, Titan lay on a soft orthopedic bed. His midsection was wrapped in thick white bandages, and a patch of fur on his leg had been shaved for the IV line, which was finally removed. He looked thinner, tired, but when the door creaked open, his head lifted. Arthur walked in, leaning on a new canine gift he hadn't asked for, but one that eased his bad hip significantly. "Hey, big guy," Arthur whispered. Titan's tail thumped against the bedding. Thump, thump, thump. But Arthur wasn't alone. Behind him, holding the hand of Mayor Sterling, was Leoth's 7-year-old boy from the pipe. Leo looked different now. Clean, dressed in a bright red sweater, but his eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and lingering nervousness. He held a small, crumpled drawing in his hand. "Go on," the mayor urged gently. "He's waiting." Leo took a hesitant step forward. Titan didn't move. He sensed the boy's hesitation. He simply laid his chin on his front paws and let out a soft sigh, his amber eyes calm and welcoming. Leo walked up to the side of the bed. He looked at the scars on Titan's face, the size of his paws, the bandages on his stomach. "Does it hurt?" Leo asked softly. Arthur smiled sadly. "A little. But he's tough. He's made of steel, this one." Leo reached out and touched the velvety spot between Titan's ears. Titan closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating in his throat. "I drew this for him," Leo said, placing the paper on the bed. It was a drawing of a black dog with a cape, standing on top of a giant wave. Underneath, in messy crayon letters, it read, "Titan the hero." "He looks like a monster in the stories," Leo whispered. "But he's not." "No," Arthur said, his voice thick. "He's a guardian. People just forgot to look close enough to see the difference." The changes at the shipyard happened fast. Henderson didn't lose his job, but he lost his arrogance. The morning Titan was discharged, Henderson was waiting in the parking lot. He didn't say much. He just handed Arthur a set of keys to a new, insulated security cabin own with heating, a proper bed, and a designated kennel space. Corporate approved the budget, Henderson mumbled, looking at his shoes. And I bought the best dog food they had, the expensive kind, for the recovery. Arthur took the keys. He looked at the man who had once wanted Titan dead. "Thank you, Henderson," Arthur said. Henderson nodded, patted Titan awkwardly on the head, his hand shaking slightly, and walked away. But the biggest change wasn't the cabin, or the commendation from the city council, or the news crews that came to film the miracle dog of Blackwood Pier. The biggest change was the silence. The loneliness that had defined Arthur's life for a decade was gone. 6 months later, on a warm summer evening, Arthur sat on the edge of the pier. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and purple hues of the sunset. Titan sat beside him, fully healed, his coat gleaming like obsidian in the dying light. The scar on his stomach was just a silver line now, a badge of honor. They watched the seagulls dip and dive over the water. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a treat. Titan took it gently, his amber eyes filled with a profound, quiet intelligence. They didn't need to speak. The world had called him a beast. The world had called him a liability. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the shipyard, Arthur knew the truth. In a world full of noise and judgment, loyalty often wears a scary face, and sometimes the only thing standing between a child and the darkness is the one creature everyone else was too afraid to love. Arthur rested his hand on the dog's head. "Good boy, Titan," he whispered. "We're on duty." Titan watched the horizon, ears pricked, ready for whatever the night would bring.